Ymedia.
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 Stay tuned with Ymedia.
Ymedia is a media company. With 360-degree approach.
Hello and welcome back to Ymedia Newsroom. I'm Ramona Singh, and it's great to spend this time with you. And now, if you've heard the latest rumors of what's happening in the White House and a specific President Trump aide, the latest news, and I'm going to go over a couple of news stories that have come out about this specific aide, is that they have worked for more than a year without a security clearance. And so who is that President Trump aide in the White House? Well, it is Natalie Harp, who's been essentially making headlines as of late. And she is one of the president's closest aides, reportedly worked in the White House for more than a year without completing the security clearance, that process that is normally needed. It's actually required to be in the West Wing and to be a personnel in the West Wing. So now Harp has ultimately submitted the necessary paperwork after President Trump personally intervened. So now this has made headlines. And yeah, you can see there's, like, if you look it up, there's many pictures of President Trump with Miss Harp, as his closest aide, and she's usually in the background of most of his photos and press conferences, travels with the president. And so Harp is 35 years old, and she served as a special assistant and executive to the president. Now, the two people familiar with the matter said that she repeatedly delayed or declined to complete the clearance process. And the White House official said that Harp received multiple extensions to submit required documents, and President Trump reportedly intervened personally before she completed the SF-86 security questionnaire. And this SF-86 questionnaire requires extensive disclosures of finances, residences, foreign contacts, and other background information, because the Secret Service and some senior aides reportedly raised concerns about Harp's access to the president as well as data. The White House now says that the Harp holds the necessary clearance to do her job, even though she was there for about a year without security clearance, and how that was just, allowed to happen is actually mind-blowing, that I almost didn't have any words for. So now there's no public evidence that Harp has leaked any classified material or any charges with security offenses, of course, but this also flags a massive concern because Natalie Harp is consistently with the president, and she's frequently beside President Trump and has reportedly helped him manage his communications, as well as including preparing printed news coverage and posting dictated messages on Truth Social for the president. So she's become known as President Trump's human printer, and that's the term that they're calling her in the White House. And during the 2024 campaign, that was mainly what she was responsible for. So now also her proximity to the president, because she works with him so closely, means that she could encounter sensitive conversations or documents, making the clearance delay a legitimate security and accountability issue on behalf of the White House, and more specifically in the West Wing. And now this is just one news story about Natalie Harp, the other one being that, if you recall, Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff is also facing criticism after making suggestive reference to President Trump's closest aide, Natalie Harp, during a campaign rally. So now this controversy has intensified a strategic debate among Democrats. Well, we know the Democrats want to come back into office, and the midterm elections is very important to them, and in terms of then in 2 years who they will put up as the presidential candidate. So now there are also the Democrats are having this essentially identity debate, right? Who are they? We have a lot of Democrats who are more left-leaning, progressive Democrats for winning primaries over Democrats who are from the establishment. And so there's that debate of what is the Democratic message. And now here is another one, whether, when it comes to how to essentially approach President Trump and the type of accusations or debates or the level to be able to go at the current Republican administration and President Trump's administration. So now what's taken place is now that there's a controversy that's intensified the strategic debate among Democrats, and the debate being whether future candidates should fight President Trump using similar personal attacks as President Trump does in his style, or offer voters a more restrained and governance-focused alternative. So in this case, you have Ossoff that's been criticizing President Trump for wanting to travel with Natalie, his aide, abroad, the aircraft gifted by Qatar. And the reference was about, as who've been speaking with, about Natalie Harp, the 35-year-old aide, White House aide. And the comments was widely interpreted as insinuating that President Trump and Ms. Harp have a relationship extending beyond her official duties, is what this Democratic candidate made reference to at a rally. And so, mind you, there's no evidence supporting such an insinuation. That is the case, but the main case here is that Trump compared Ossoff to Pee Wee Herman in response, and so that is in President Trump's true nature of really, with personal attacks. And so he responded to Ossoff saying, you look like Pee Wee Herman, and if you don't know who Pee Wee Herman is, he's the children's character and who used to be on TV. And so now White House Communications Director Stephen Chung responded with a personal insult as well, while other Republicans called Ossoff's comments sexist. And California Governor Gavin Newsom, who is speculated to run for the presidential nomination for the Democratic Party. And Ossoff represented that more combative Democratic approach should be taken when dealing with President Trump. And then you have on the alternative, you have Governor Josh Shapiro and Andy Bashar, who've really said that they want to maintain a more restrained, results-oriented profiles. And so the debate that has essentially sprung in the Democratic Party is, do you respond to President Trump in a more personal attack way, or do you restrain yourself because the voters maybe want to bring respect back into the office, right? So Democratic strategic strategist David Axelrod, who worked during President Obama's time, said that party voters appreciate Ossoff's willingness to confront President Trump. But you have this time where you have President Trump who's transformed how political communication is now routinely being used, right? Since President Trump's second win back into the Oval Office in his second term, we've now become accustomed to his style, right? Which is nicknames, right? Crooked Hillary and some other ones that are still sticking until almost a decade later. And what his style of personal ridicule and attacks against his opponents, whether it's about how they appear, in this case, comparing Ossoff to Pee Wee Herman or otherwise. And Democrats are now deciding whether to match that approach, essentially, showing that this approach could project strength because President Trump did receive the votes, or do they want to reinforce a type of politics that many voters say that they dislike? Perhaps voters are saying they dislike this level of personal attacks, and they really want politicians to stick to the facts when it comes to policy and not go so much into prying into, what is Natalie Harp doing with. I mean, she works at the White House and she is the president's closest aide, and there should be nothing to it. But so that's essentially that comment alone raised massive flags within the Democratic Party, who's essentially having this identity overhaul of what they represent, who they represent, who are their candidates. Are they going to be more progressive? Are they going to be more to the center? And really what this means. So there is a strategic divide that could become increasingly visible ahead of the 2028 presidential campaign. And we're also seeing that take place right now during the midterms times. And of course, speaking of the 2028 presidential election and who will be the presidential candidate, well, we have for the Republican side, we have Vice President J.D. Vance, who's now raised a substantial amount of money in the Hamptons. Vice President J.D. Vance reportedly raised more than $5 million at a Hamptons fundraiser attended by approximately 35 younger Republican donors and political financiers. Now, the event was held on August 19th at the home of 1789 Capitol President Omid Malik, and it attracted roughly 35 attendees, many of them in their 30s and their 40s, and the fundraiser brought in more than $5 million. Now, attendees reportedly included Donald Trump Jr., the president's son, Donald Trump Jr., and Polymarket founder Shane Copeland. And also other people who attended were Brendan Lutnick, who is the son of Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who also attended the fundraiser, and Chris Buskrick of the Rock Bridge Network also helped host the event. And Vice President J.D. Vance has not formally announced his bid for the 2028 presidential campaign, but it's highly speculated that he may want to run, given that he's serving his time as the vice president. But of course, there is also rumors that there might be other contenders in the race. So now Vance would be a potential successor to President Trump, who is constitutionally barred from seeking another election in 2028 because President Trump has already will serve his 2 terms, which is the maximum allowed for any individual as president, which is for 2 terms. Now, it's important for Vance to build independent fundraising network that could give him organizational advantage for any future Republican primary that is scheduled to happen quite soon. So after next year, we're looking at this really picking up. So by mid next year, you're going to see more of that take place, and who will really put their names in and go through the Republican primaries. Now, the 35 donors produced more than $5 million demonstrates a concentrated financial power that showed up to support Vance. So that's quite significant to raise that amount of money in just one event with 35 people. And coming back to Canada, well, it seems that the grocery chains that are named in a maple syrup lawsuit are now announced as Loblaws, Sobeys, and Metro that have been named as defendants in a proposed Quebec class action lawsuit alleging that the syrup advertised as maple syrup was diluted with approximately 50% cane sugar. Now, this lawsuit alleges that hundreds of thousands of containers may have been sold, and the producer is accused of misrepresenting the product's contents. Well, maple syrup is a Canadian product, and so when Canadians want to purchase maple syrup, then they would believe that 100% of the contents should be maple syrup, not half maple syrup and half sugar cane. So now the grocery chains are accused of negligence in selling it, essentially saying that it's misadvertisement. And the allegations have not been proven yet, but the proceeds remain as a proposed class action and must receive court authorization before proceeding. So now this Canadian compositional and labeling rules, they restrict what may be marketed as maple syrup. So now retailers can face scrutiny over their supply chain controls, and even when they did not manufacture the product, but hey, they're selling it and it is on a label. So the maple fraud, which is what the angle now is attracting attention. And even though it is legally important question whether retailers, did Loblaws, did Sobeys, did they really know that they're selling a brand of maple syrup that is not 100% maple syrup, or reasonably should they have known, is part of what will be taking place in court because of this lawsuit. Now, we've been covering about what's happening with some of the auto plants that have essentially are remaining idle because they're not sure about what's going to happen with the tariffs as well as the supply chains in the auto industry that is quite integrated with the United States, Mexico, and in Canada. So the latest news is that Canadian defense tech firm like Dominion Dynamics and armored vehicle maker Rochelle are bidding to take over idle auto manufacturing space, such as the shuttered Stellantis plant in Brampton, Ontario. Now, these proposals aim to repurpose the assembly lines for military production, and when it comes to transitioning the laid off auto workers into advanced defense manufacturing. So it is good news if it's able to be repurposed and also be able to bring back some of the laid off auto workers in a new plant. So now this is quite interesting because these interested firms have submitted proposals or bids for the unused facility spaces. And the idle Stellantis plant, assembly plant in Brampton has been empty since 2003 to 2023. And essentially what it means is about retooling its purposes and mainly targeting it to be able to provide space and assembly space for a domestic production when it comes to defense contracts. This is something that we know that Ottawa is highly hitting its markets when it comes to the 2% of GDP for defense spending. That's already hit its target, but it appears that the Prime Minister has suggested that by 2030, he wants to hit 4% of GDP target, and there's the NATO target of 5% of GDP to spend on defense by 2035. And a big key component there is that, Canada doesn't really necessarily have a big defense sector, and part of that is to grow a homegrown defense sector. And so this is critical if that's going to be the case, and there's going to be Canadian defense companies who are going to be bidding for procurement and some of those bids. Well, it's going to be important for them to have manufacturing space and plants, and so to repurpose existing plants is a quite credible thing to do. So now proponents are also estimating that they're going to absorb hundreds of thousands of idle auto workers and bring them back to work, right? And this is very critical to make sure that Canadians are remaining employed. And so unions are also remaining cautious and emphasizing that selling or shifting the plant away from automotive use is a major blow while pushing for active vehicle manufacturing solutions. So the unions are saying, which essentially cover these auto workers, are saying, if we do this at a time where we're having our, top chief negotiators and our trade minister dealing with the United States to make sure that we're able to save the auto sector, it's really signaling that, we're moving away from what we're debating on and what we're negotiating on. But these are nevertheless it's important to have backup plans. And these defense companies need industrial space. They need skilled manufacturing labor. And when you have skilled manufacturing labor who are out of a job, of course, it makes sense to be able to bring them back on board. So these automotive workers already possess experience in precision manufacturing and complex supply chains. So this conversion would still require new equipment, of course, security controls and specialized training. But Ottawa is attempting to expand this domestic defense industry capacity while also dealing with this tariff uncertainty, which is threatening the traditional automotive employment. So this is, quite something to keep an eye on, as the labor match is promising when it comes to repurposing these idle plants for defense, bringing back the auto workers. But this is something that, of course, is evolving, and we're going to keep an eye on it. And this summer has been nothing but to cover what's been taking place with the wildfires. And Canada's 2026 wildfire season is tracking to be the fourth worst on record, with over 4.1 million hectares burned across the country. Now, federal officials report that active blazes remain a severe concern in multiple regions, driven by prolonged heat and dry conditions. So the latest current fire statistics are that a total area burned is over 4.1 million hectares. So that is about 41,000 square kilometers. And current active fires are approximately 582 active fires burning nationwide. And out of control ones are 31 fires are currently classified as out of control. And so when it comes to total fires this season, there have been nearly 4,793 individual starts recorded. And the regional outlook when it comes to risks are the hardest hit areas where there's activity that have accelerated significantly through the months of July and August, heavily impacting Northwest Ontario, if you recall, what took place there with thousands of people displaced. And if you saw, it was for many days in southern Ontario and in Toronto. You saw the sky was hazy, it was orange-like, and that affected, of course, Northeast United States. And for that, you had President Trump say that he's going to impose tariffs because of the wildfires and how it was polluting the air quality in northeast of the United States. But that was just northwestern Ontario. But then there's also been wildfires in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia. Now, the forecasters predict above average fire danger for September across northern British Columbia, northern Quebec, and Labrador. Throughout the lower baselines, seasonal temperatures are reducing the likelihood of massive new fires. Now, fires have prompted major evacuations and destroyed homes. When it comes to British Columbia and parts of central Canada, they've experienced severe outbreaks as smoke has created health and air quality problems far beyond active fire zones. So this is very significant as Canada's most destructive fire seasons have become more frequent as hotter conditions when it comes to drought and how that's accumulating in the forest fuels and have created longer periods of extreme fire. So this ranking season only by hectares burned is quite an understatement for the amount of damage. And we also have tens of thousands of people who've been displaced from their homes. And in British Columbia, we're sad to say that one life has been taken. It was an 80-year-old woman who could not move fast enough out of her home, and she lost her life. So this is a quite significant wildfire season, but also important to be able to kind of look at what is taking place and really about climate change as critical points. Now we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.